this place doesn't exist. It was never here. No, this isn't a mirage, nor is it some secret location known only to a few. The place I'm talking about used to be a town, one filled with people going about their daily lives, working, eating, sleeping, living, and then one day it vanished. If we go back to 1920, we find our town sitting pretty on an official map of Ohio. Here it is again in 1930, looking just as it did 10 years prior, but if we try to see it on any map after this point, we find nothing. The town has simply ceased to exist. It's like someone took a giant eraser to the world, wiping it away so that now no trace remains. But there are photographs showing that the town did indeed exist. There are stories from people who lived there, families who were torn apart by its sudden disappearance. Yet if you bring these accounts to the government, they'll tell you that everything you're saying is false. There was never a town here. You must be mistaken. So why don't we start at the beginning? Why don't we look at what life was like in this lost town, what happened during its final days? And maybe, just maybe, find out why it disappeared. For our story today, we'll be looking at the case of the lost town of Amador City. The year is 1869 and a small group of prospectors have just discovered gold near the Malcolm Hill in California. Soon word spreads and thousands of fortune hunters make their way to the area, eager to make a quick buck. Tents spring up everywhere and the population booms, tripling and even quadrupling every month. By 1870, the camp has been named Amador City and it boasts around 4,000 residents. Unlike other mining towns which were often little more than glorified slums, Amador City was planned out. Its streets were laid out in neat grids and it boasted a mix of sturdy wooden and brick buildings. In fact, the town looked so good that many residents began calling it the gem of the Sierra. Unfortunately, while the town may have been beautiful, the same couldn't be said for those living within it. As is often the case in mining camps, violence was commonplace. Fights broke out regularly between fellow miners, drunkards, gamblers, and hired guns, and it wasn't uncommon for men to disappear into the night, never to be seen again. As the years passed though, things gradually got better. Gold became harder to find and the violence began to subside. People started thinking about how they could make the most of their new town. They built schools and churches, shops and hotels. Families moved in and children played happily in the streets. By the turn of the century, the town had become a picture of peace and prosperity. But that's not to say everyone was happy. There was still a faction of people who blamed the town's existence on an ancient curse. Before the miners had arrived, the area had been home to the Native American tribe, the Nisenan. Legend says that when the tribe's chief was killed by a miner, his spirit placed a curse upon the land, dooming it to disaster. Every time the town seemed to take a step forward, something would happen to push them back. There were floods and fires, droughts and economic downturns. Just when it seemed the town might actually become a permanent fixture, something would come along to wipe away the progress. Still, most people dismissed these tales as superstitious nonsense. After all, it was hardly as if a curse could kill thousands of people, right? In 1920, the town of Amador City looked set for another prosperous year. Crops were healthy, business was booming and crime had hit an all-time low. For the first time in over 50 years, people felt a sense of security and permanence. Maybe this really was their forever home. And then on April 26th, everything changed. In the early hours of the morning, a strong earthquake shook the region. People were thrown from their beds and animals ran screaming through the streets. But aside from a few broken dishes and a cracked chimney, there was very little damage. Life soon returned to normal, and the people of Amador City went about their days as they always had done. Then on May 21st, another earthquake struck. This one was worse than the last. Houses were destroyed, shopfronts collapsed, and dead animals lay strewn across the ground. Worst of all, though, was the loss of life. Over 40 people were confirmed dead, with dozens more missing. Once again, though, the town seemed determined to press on. Funerals were held and people tried to pick up the pieces, but it was clear that rebuilding would be a long and difficult task. Then on June 10th, a third earthquake struck, this time claiming a further 13 lives and destroying most of the remaining buildings. At this point, people began to get scared. Was this cursed land really doomed to suffer endlessly? Should they pack up and leave? In spite of the tragedy, though, most people decided to stay put. Surely things couldn't get any worse, right? Well, they could. On June 21st, the town was rocked by another earthquake, this time killing a further 15 people. Then on June 23rd, yet another earthquake struck, followed by 2 more on June 25th and finally 1 more on June 29th in total. There were 8 earthquakes in just 2 months, killing more than 75 people and leveling the town. Frightened and desperate, the townspeople did what they could to protect themselves. They bolted doors, strengthened window frames, moved their beds away from the walls, but it was no use. On June 29th, the final earthquake struck, causing widespread destruction and taking more than 40 lives. Now utterly terrified, the people fled. Some stayed in the nearby towns of Plymouth and Jackson. Others made their way to San Francisco or traveled back east. Within days, the entire town was abandoned. But as far as anyone can tell, this is where the story ends. There are photographs showing that the town did exist. There are stories from people who lived there, families who were torn apart by its sudden disappearance. Yet if you bring these accounts to the government, they'll tell you that everything you're saying is false. There was never a town here. You must be mistaken. So what happened to it? Did the curse claim it? Or was there another explanation? Well, according to the official narrative, no such town ever existed. Any records that seem to show its existence are either mistakes or forgeries. Any photographs are fake or mislabeled. In short, the entire thing is a hoax. But others disagree, citing old newspaper articles and maps which clearly show that the town did exist. Could there really be two conflicting histories? Is it possible that a whole town could vanish without a trace? What happened to the people, the buildings, the roads, and the shops? Well, there are a few theories. One is that following the earthquakes, the town was deliberately wiped off the maps by the government. Perhaps they didn't want to deal with the bureaucracy of administering a disaster zone, or perhaps they wanted to hide the fact that a local curse had claimed hundreds of lives. Another theory is that the town was evacuated but then completely forgotten about. With no roads connecting it to the outside world and its phone lines cut, it was effectively stranded. When help finally did arrive, they found no trace of its former residents and so assumed that everyone had moved elsewhere. But why have the official records been altered to erase it? Why does the government insist that it never existed? Well, here's the thing. While there's evidence that supports both sides of the argument, there's also plenty of room for doubt. If the town did exist, why does no one remember it? Why are there no old-timers who remember living there? Where did the buildings go? What happened to the roads and the people? And if it really was cursed, why didn't the government evacuate everyone sooner? We may never know the truth. All we can say for sure is that there are photographs showing that the town did exist, but whether it's a ghost town, a town lost in time, or a town that never was, one thing is clear. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. Now you need to watch. They found a mysterious abandoned island on Google Maps. What's on it? Or have a look at this bizarre abandoned amusement park. What happened here?